What's good, everybody? Today is Monday, January 19th, 2026. Happy Martin Luther King Day. Much love, appreciation for freedom, and you know what it is. For those that don't know, my name is Luther, real estate extraordinaire here in the Kansas City market, representing for Upside Property Services. And on this YouTube channel, I talk about investing in real estate, primarily capital strategy and operations for real estate investors, private money lenders, and those kind of all involved in that realm. And so if you've been tracking the last year or so, I've been driving it home, talking about funding and financing, the capital aspect, the different types of loans that are available for real estate investors. And I mentioned something last week in regard to gap funds and funding and financing. And I know for sure I mentioned it on my Facebook live stream that I did, that the capital aspect is the most important. And I have to kind of dig into that. And I think it's a good segue into today's video, because I need to preface that, or maybe not really preface it, but dig a little bit deeper into that. And I think for me, for sure, and for a lot of the colleagues that I've, helped in the real estate space, whether they were a friend or a business partner or a client or a customer, you name it. For us, a lot of it came down to the capital, but that's not really the case for everybody. And it really kind of depends on you and what you're looking to do, okay, what you're bringing to the table. And I know I've mentioned it before, the capital has to align with the strategy. And then from there, the operations is huge, because as you are doing deals and coming across different opportunities, and you are going through the process, whether it's just a simple purchase, or if you're doing a renovation, or if you're doing a refi, then you get to figure out the operations and how that really goes. And so for me, again, and a lot of the people that I know in the space, the capital is the most important thing, but you need to have the other three, you got to have the other two pillars sorted out if you want to be a successful real estate investor, and if you want your investments, your portfolio to stand the test of time. Because most of what I've done with most of my partners and for most of my clients is long-term buy and hold, cash flow, single family home investments right here in the Kansas City market. And part of the strategy is seller financing, okay? So I'll tell you what, for some of y'all, the capital may not be the most important thing, okay? You may have capital yourself, or you may be connected with someone who has capital, but you may not have the experience, and you may not necessarily have a strategy that fits in with whatever market you're investing in and whatever is happening in the world. Like, there's a lot of different factors that are out of our control. Interest rates is one of them, inventory is another, and the list goes on. So I have to emphasize, the capital is important, but we got to have a good strategy, and then the operations has to be on point. We gotta operate the real estate investing business like it's an actual business. And that's where I know I've struggled in the past, and that's where I see a ton of investors struggle to this day, is the strategy and the operations. I know a lot of investors, and I've used short-term debt in the past. I know a lot of investors, that's pretty much how they've built their portfolio and built their business, is off of short-term debt. Well, if you're using short-term debt, then you're gonna have to maneuver a certain way. right? You're gonna have to have certain strategies, investment strategies that align with that type of capital or debt. And then of course to the operations. If you want to keep those investments and you want to have a thriving, cash flowing, wealth generating real estate enterprise or portfolio, then again, the operations from there is huge. And so I wanted to, tag on to the last video and what I talked about last week on social media. For me, like at this point in the game, right, the capital is the most important thing, because as I mentioned before, our strategy is on point. Okay. On the front end, I mean, I've talked about the acquisitions and renovations and sourcing deals and that sort of thing in some of the previous videos. And then going from there, where we have really made our mark and where we've been able to see the greatest long-term success is using seller financing as an exit strategy. So this is a pretty big gem here for those who were out there, because I mentioned before, there's a lot that goes unnoticed, and there's a lot that doesn't get talked about as much in the real estate community. And those are some of the things that I like to talk about, right? To help some of the newer investors, or maybe a brand new investor who's trying to get going and they want to create more freedom and they want to create more cash flow. Because I think at the end of the day, that's what a lot of us got into this for. But it's not just for the newer investor once looking to grow, it's also for the investors who are already in the mix and they might feel stuck like I did. I had to pump the brakes a couple years ago because I saw where I was headed, and I kind of saw that the market was changing, and I didn't want to continue going down that track. And you can again check my story out on social media. I've talked about it in previous videos. We were using short-term debt, and we were going through the renovation and refi process. We were successfully getting all the way through it and doing seller financing on the back end. But where things got interesting is with the capital aspect and the gap funds. Okay, so I don't want to keep you too long. I'm not going to make this video too much longer, but things change over time. Real estate, as I've said before, the market, it's like this constantly changing, ever evolving type of thing. And it's important to really operate the thing like a business. That means me as the CEO, or me as the point person, helping my business partners, helping my clients. I need to have a very good understanding of what's coming in, what's coming out, what debts need to be paid, what loans need to be paid off, and then how the money, how the investments are performing. If we're continually going over budget on our renovation projects, at some point that's going to catch up. If we continue buying properties at a certain, ARV or LTV, and the market turns, at some point we may overextend ourselves and have to bring more money to the table, not just for the overages on the renovations, but to cover the gaps for refinancing, maybe paying ourselves a little bit something, right? And then those unforeseen things, those hidden costs, those costs that a lot of investors don't talk about, from the earnest money to the insurance, to the inspections, to the appraisals, to the utility costs, to citations on vacant properties, or maybe they aren't vacant, and the list goes on. I think you kind of get the idea. And that's why I so much have emphasized the capital piece, because that's what I needed, right? If you are an investor out there, again, and you have access to capital, you're gonna need a good operator. You're gonna need at least one good agent, okay? You're gonna, and like most investors, you're gonna need a solid GC, and you're eventually, especially if you're doing renovation projects, you already know, you're gonna need more or less of a mini Rolodex of contractors, okay? And the list goes on from there, not to mention a property manager if you're not gonna do it yourself. If you got money, okay, again, you're probably not gonna be doing all of that yourself. And so even if you had someone in a certain market like myself who you could partner with, I myself still outsource certain things, certain tasks, right? I mentioned the contractor, the property manager, and then there's even tax advisors and attorneys, because there's things that come up as an entrepreneur, as a business owner. All of that stuff costs money, and all of that takes an ability to respond. So as a CEO, as a broker, as an investment partner, okay, as a service provider for our, you name it, our tenants, our residents, okay, and then again the community as a whole. Like, this is a whole operation. It's a whole business. So I want to emphasize, okay, more so today for those who have capital, right? You got to understand that, and that's another reason why I favor the partnerships, whether it's just a strategic partner or a full-on partner who owns that LLC or that real estate investing business with you, right? We're gonna need that somehow, some way. If not a partner, you're gonna have to collaborate with all of the people that I mentioned before, and then some, okay? Again, for those especially who want to create cash flow that is more sustainable and more long-lasting for those out there who want to, he and ha and ki all the way to the bank each and every month, each and every quarter, every year, perhaps for decades. And then, you could figure out what to do with it as you're aging. And most of my clients and investors, they're gonna be passing it down somehow, some way to their heirs. And so I'm gonna leave it at that for today. I know I covered a couple different topics, but the main thing is, yeah, the capital is important, but especially in today's market, the strategies have to be on point, right? However you're looking to place that capital, and then the operations is huge. So again, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate y'all. Stay blessed. All right, take care.